Great. Good morning. We welcome you to our presentation. Jonathan and I are going to do a quick introduction, then we're going to throw you into some interaction and discussions and activities and information. So how's that for a quick Monday morning? So just want to make sure you can see the slide. When we put you in breakout groups, you'll be able to show your faces and talk then, but probably with a large group like this. What we'd like is if you have any questions, put them in the chat box and we will get to the chat box. We kind of have three sections and we'll look at the questions at that point. So this is our quick introduction. I have been doing some work with Smart Starts in North Carolina for a couple of years, working with executive directors, working with different boards. Also have done online board meetings, online retreats as well as in-person retreats. And I use board source material. So I'm in one of the invited level of board source consultants. The other thing I do is I teach as an instructor at the Duke University nonprofit program. That program is kind of their community-facing part of the university, and that's with adults that are in the nonprofit world. Okay, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jeanne. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Meagher-Zayas. I am coming to you from Rochester, New York. I'm excited to connect with many of you from North Carolina and all over. You'll see three logos here. I'm wearing three hats today. So full-time, I work as the Director of Agency Advancement for Villa of Hope. We're a mental health human service provider in Rochester, New York. I also work per diem with the Community Foundation for the Greater Capital Region in Albany, New York. I do their board trainings, especially related to board diversity. And then I also am a volunteer board member as well. And I'm going to talk about my experience being the immediate past board chair and board development chair for Mission Accomplished Transition Services, which is a small community-focused organization in Albany dedicated to providing professional development training. So thanks. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Jonathan and I met when I did some work with the Community Foundation of New York, and we connected over a lot of conversations. I realized he's a great example of a nonprofit professional who's kind of wearing all those different hats. He's done a lot locally with his YNPN and other groups on leadership development of a kind of a next generation of board members, the young professionals. So I thought our voice we bring different experiences in the nonprofit world. So that's kind of the thinking for today. Oops, technology, there you go.
Awesome, and we're just gonna go over three sections for today as well. And each section is gonna walk away with three main tips for each of the kind of areas, but we're gonna start with readiness, talk about assessment, talk about tips for getting yourself ready for evaluating your diversity on your board. Two, we're going to talk about recruitment and actual recruitment strategies that you can kind of take to move forward with things. And three, talk about onboarding, because onboarding is just as important as impactful to make sure the effective board experience is, especially for individuals from underrepresented groups. So three main sections. We'll have breakout groups after each section as well, but that's our roadmap for today.
All right, we have a question for you. We're going to get you in a breakout group really quick. So what we want you to do is look at these pictures and pick the one that speaks to you about how your board is moving forward with diversity. So you pick one picture. We got 6 pictures here. And what we're going to do in just a minute is put you in breakout groups of either 2 or 3 people and give you a few minutes to just chat with each other about how does this speak to you? Which picture speaks to you? Because we want you to kind of have a sense of that, kind of a gut feeling of which one went, yeah, that really is how we're moving forward with diversity. And then we're putting you in a small breakout group because we want to give you a chance to connect. One of the important things I've learned this year around all these online meetings is connect before content, although we're going to connect with content, but people like to talk to somebody else. So I think we're ready. Jessica, if you want to put people into the breakout groups, we're going to give you 5 minutes tops and then bring you back. I think everybody's flying back in here in Harry Potter mode, sitting in one room. Suddenly you spin around, the bookcase opens, you go through another staircase, and here you are back into our room again. So I'm going to ask, let's see, if your name starts with F, let me hear from somebody whose first name starts with an F. Anybody in here? How about F or G? I'm just picking in some letters. Do I have an F or a G? I want to hear what happened in your conversation. Or first name with an F or G. If not, I'm going to ask you to type into the chat box. Did I pick up one that doesn't work? How about, let's see, how about Carrie? I see you sitting there, Carrie Theall and Karen Comedy. Carrie, can I hear from you? What happened in your breakout group? You'll have to unmute and just tell us. Give us a Twitter.
Wow,
Okay.
I'm being called out on a Monday. Really?
I know.
We just kind of compared diversity structure in our different counties, which are very different from each other, and talked a little bit about our struggles. I'm sorry, I came in on this call kind of late, so I hadn't had a chance to look at the pictures, and I will be honest, I just don't know what they mean. I have brick in my office, so I'm just going to go with the brick one.
Okay. And Karen Comedy, how about you?
Sure, thanks. So my group, we had a couple who chose the large tree with the small person, who we felt like we are working on those things in our boards, but we feel like we have a long way to go. And then another person chose the Legos, again, as a model for the construction and the work that goes into it. And another person said that she also could have chosen the tools because they're also working hard on their team, figuring out the tools. We also, like Carrie's group, we also talked a little bit about the diversity in our communities and what that meant for diversity of the board, and how we need to sort through some of those things about what does it mean for our board to be diverse.
Okay, thank you too for letting me call you out on a Monday morning, as Carrie put it. That's very good of you. Okay, what we want to do now is these are the three areas we're going to look at, and I have a poll I want to throw up here so we can see kind of what's going on with your areas. So we're going to share with you three statements, and we want you to pick the statement that best characterizes the approach of your board of directors. So I'm launching the polling now. It says, which statement best characterizes the approach of your board of directors to board diversity and inclusiveness? And you get to pick one. A, as many board members believe being more diverse would help us to better meet our mission, and they raise issues related to race and ethnicity often. B, as most board members prefer we not take race or ethnicity into account. And C, our board does not seem to have strong positive or negative feelings about inclusiveness. So we're at about half voting. Now we're way beyond half voting. Y'all are voting well. Thank you very much. And there's only a few more voting, so I'm going to give you about 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, it hasn't changed in a while, so I think we've stopped. So this is what we got, which is a good thing to know. You think your board believes being diverse would help you to better meet your mission. Some boards that say we prefer we not take race or ethnicity into account are people who think that we can have diversity, but we shouldn't measure it or talk about it or be intent about it. And C, as our board does not seem to have strong positive or negative feelings about inclusiveness, so that's about a little more than a third. The idea behind that would be, hopefully we can give you some ideas to help build the case for why it's important. Sometimes boards think we're doing well, we shouldn't have to worry about it, and they're not kind of with the momentum moving forward yet. So I'm going to take that poll off and let us go to here.
Alrighty. Well, first up, as I mentioned before on our roadmap, we have readiness. So we're going to share a few tips and strategies on how you can really think about how you can self-assess your board and have meaningful conversations about listening and change and kind of moving forward with readiness.
We start with the readiness because we think a lot of boards jump into saying we got to be diverse. It's important. We've heard from funders. We're hearing from our state association. We're hearing from everybody else. We got to be diverse, but they've really not kind of done the internal work first. So again, we're going to give you 3 tips in each of these areas. It's not going to change the world. So we're giving you kind of 3 points to think about in terms of how do you start getting your board ready. So for the third of the group that said we're neither positive nor negative, these might be some ideas to help you move to readiness. And some of you who are already into readiness, this might give you some ways to jumpstart what you're doing and move you forward. If you kind of jump into having diversity on your board, like I would say, a dysfunctional board without diversity is no different than a dysfunctional board with diversity. So it's helpful to look at your board first before you jump into bringing whatever you define diversity as. What we want to talk about is a culture of inquiry. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about kind of a style of governing. Board culture determines a lot of how your board carries out its work. And that could be example of, how you make decisions, how you talk to each other. Is it okay to disagree? Because I've been on boards where everybody comes in, they sit down, they eat lunch, they vote, and they leave, and there's no disagreement. What I hear from people a lot is, how do we get people talking in our board meeting? And so I think you need to come up with some ways to think about what is our culture and how do we create a way for people to have difference of opinions, which is not like disagreeing, I think you're wrong. It's just looking at things differently. A board culture that starts to ask good questions, I think will come up with better answers. One of the ideas I give a lot of boards is, instead of, when they have something to discuss, instead of saying what are our answers, start out with what are the questions we need to ask. So then you brainstorm your list of questions. Then you can look at your list of questions and you could, as a group, select which are the top questions that we want to spend our time on. So then you're spending your time in the board meeting on questions that have significance to people. You're using their actual passion and their expertise because you're talking about questions. This also helps people who are, there's always somebody at every board meeting who's quick to come up with an answer, because that's more that technical aspect of being a leadership. So the more adaptive aspect of being a leadership is to start with questions that allows the conversation to come out. Some ideas around that would be, are your board members reluctant to have differing opinions? So one suggestion, if your board is, as I suggest, we do a lot of reading, we bring ideas to you. One idea would be divide the room in half. People on this side of the room, you have to agree with this point. Tell us why we should move forward. People on this side of the room, tell us why we should not move forward. If you're doing it on Zoom, you could say everybody who's A through J, put them in a breakout group and say, come up with 5 reasons why we should move forward. And then after that, you have K through Z, put them in a group and have them come up with 5 reasons why we shouldn't move forward. So what you're doing is attaching disagreement, not to people, but to issues. So that people start to see it's okay to disagree, and they start to see, well, we're going to look at both sides of an issue. If you think of your board as a strategic asset to be leveraged and developed, rather than just kind of a legal necessity to be endured, the idea of culture of inquiry probably appeals to you, because you want to develop that strategic asset. The other idea I would share has to do with ending with a question. The idea here being, boards that start to assess themselves, even at a small level, tend to do a better job. So the first idea we talked about was having conversations around questions and thinking of your board as a strategic asset. The second idea is ending with a question. What I suggest, if when you're meeting in person, give everybody the piece of paper that looks the same and have them answer the question. If you're doing this in a Zoom meeting, you could create a Google Doc and everybody can type on that anonymously. And you could ask one question after each meeting. First time, a suggestion might be, what was the best part of this meeting? See what people say. The second one might be, next month, how effective was this meeting? And you're asking anonymously, and you're asking the people in the room or in the Zoom. So you're not, people can't argue with their own data. You're not making this up from what does a survey of 100 boards. No, this is your board answering either what was the best part of the meeting or how effective was this meeting? I only do one question a month, a meeting, because what you're trying to do is get a quick response and just kind of get the pulse of where your board is. Another question could be, how could this meeting have been improved? So if you start asking one question at the end of every meeting, what you're doing is you're getting people to start paying attention to how we're doing as a board. If we're paying attention to how we're doing as a board, we are ultimately going to become more of that board with a culture of inquiry and be more open to difference of opinion, which leads us to being more productive with the diversity on our board. Because diversity can be race, and it can be age, and it can be just difference of lifestyle, as you know. And if people aren't able to hear each other, if they can't communicate, if we can't just hear the issue instead of getting stuck. So that was the second part. And this next one, matrix. I'm sure some of you have used a matrix. I always like to come back to this. Whenever I've done board retreats or board meetings, in fact, when I did a presentation with Jonathan's Community Foundation in New York, a board member came up to me afterwards and said, we use a board matrix and it has changed everything. It's made me look at how we recruit differently. It's made me look at board members. So this was a board member who was just at the meeting and wanted to learn more. So here's an example of a matrix. As I said, you've probably created a matrix. So I'm just going to go briefly over this. The idea of a matrix for me is 3 things to think about. First, you're categorizing all these different skill sets, demographics, expertise. I would not recommend you use all these categories. I've just kind of done a huge picture for you. What I would recommend is you have a conversation with your board and say, what's important to our board this year? What skill sets? What are we looking for in terms of these categories? So then you do an analysis of your current board and see how that fits up with what we're looking for. So I have a circle around age range and race ethnicity. I would spell those out. I didn't have enough room. So instead of saying age range, I would put, 35 and under, 36 to 50, 51 to 65, whatever categories. And under race and ethnicity, I would put categories: Caucasian, African American, Asian American, Latino, Hispanic. Put the categories, American Indian, whatever the categories are that you want to spell it out. I didn't have room here. So here's 3 things I want you to take away about matrix. 1, it needs to be self-identified. So I would ask everybody to fill this out. This is not for one person to sit down and make a decision about everybody else. Number 2, it should be transparent. People should know how we're gathering this, where it's going, because, it's kind of threatening. Why do you want all this stuff about me? So you need to be transparent. Tell people what the picture is. And then number 3, it needs to be shared. We all need to see that final picture. It should be a Google Doc. It should be projected on the wall if you're meeting in person. It should be shared as a document. It should be available as a Google Doc for people to go and look at on their own. Because this is a tool you want people to look at and say, wow, we don't have anybody who brings us experience from the tech world. We don't have anybody in politics or in civic nobody like that on our board, or everybody on our board is either a small business owner or a parent or a teacher. So we really need to expand in terms of the connections and expertise. So you're not just looking around the room and saying, gee, we're all white, but you're saying, okay, let's see how we set out here.
Thanks for kind of going over the matrix, Jeanne, because then I wanted to mention too, because I know Karen and Carrie mentioned this too. Sometimes it's important for our organization to actually define what diversity look like for our organizations, and what does that really truly mean to have a kind of diversity within our own boards, because it can look different for each organization depending on what we're going for as well. So next slide, Jeanne.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, you're good. These are 5 different types of stakeholders that we were thinking about that could be potential people to look at and say, okay, let us look at these types of stakeholders that work with our organization, and what does diversity look like within that as well. A good, first place to start is always the people you serve. Who is your organization serving, and what is the demographic of those of those people that you're serving? And does your board reflect that? Is that something to consider as well? And I know sometimes it's always hard to kind of consider too, because sometimes program recipients aren't have the capacity to sometimes fit on boards, but how do you get that perspective to ensure that their voices are heard, and that is as well, and the diversity of your speakers, program recipients. Also, not including the people you serve, but the people who you should be serving. So what are the community needs in your area, and who are the people that need your services that aren't accessing that right now, and how you can think about diversity with those people to ensure they can access your services in an inclusive and informative way. Obviously, other groups that you can think about are your partners. Who are you partnering with in terms of just vendors or other organizations or community partners that have worked together? What does diversity look like for there as well? Influencers, and I say this too, who has the ability to influence the way your organization operates. So that could be politicians, it could be stakeholders, it could be community advocates and activists who are shaking things up and thinking about posting things on online to really shape the direction of where your organization is. What does that community look like in terms of that? Community members are a great thing. I know we mentioned, some folks already mentioned, what does diversity look like in our county? What does it specifically look like, and who is in your community? And really taking a look at all the demographics within your community to think about defining diversity as well. And then also your investors, but investors who are investing not only financially in your organization, but time, resources, staff. What do they all look like to ensure that you're kind of doing a comprehensive audit of the possible demographics and types of people that you're working with for your organization?
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. And then the kind of third tip in onboarding tip that we had, or kind of strategy that we're working in, is kind of holding a crucial conversation. So Jeanne mentioned too, having those important conversations to really think about how you can discuss important issues at your organization are crucial to move forward, because having a board that just rubber stamps everything or doesn't really talk about important issues isn't going to effectively move forward, and especially move forward in important issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So having those crucial conversations are important to think about before you bring on diversity on your board, to ensure that your board is inclusive and you're ready to kind of welcome people as well. So the next slide has about kind of 7 principles that you can think about when you're having crucial conversations on your board as well. So I won't go over all of these, but these are just principles that kind of help you think about to be prepared as well. So like trying to speak from your heart, looking for connection with people, sharing your own personal perspective and story, sharing your hopes and goals. These are just principles that you can think about when you're approaching an important conversation, so that you're prepared to have these conversations and kind of navigate these important topics.
Hey, Jonathan, how do we make it safe?
So I think we have to have goals and kind of intentions about what you mean when you set up, and acknowledge kind of that you might be coming a place from hope and kind of moving forward, and not as a place of attack. So that's always a nice safe place too. And 2, also acknowledging that everyone has different opinions, and we're open to listening to those opinions too, and kind of ensuring that people are comfortable and willing to actually say things as well. Because if you are having a conversation, and this happens a lot with many individuals from underrepresented groups, you bring them onto your board, but they don't actually feel safe and comfortable about talking about those issues. So making sure that you're acknowledging that we are listening, we're ready for it too, and we're also coming from a place that's looking forward to advance the mission and advance working together.
Great.
Thanks, Jeanne. So the next one, we're going to try something out. So I hope you all are flexible with us in trying things out. But these are 3 questions, and these are 3 different types of levels of questions to start off crucial conversations. So Jeanne's going to send in the chat a Google Doc, and we want you to go on the Google Doc and mark an X on what question is most important to you in your organization right now. Everyone's at a different journey in your organization regarding board diversity. So we want you to hop on and pick which question you kind of want to, that's most important. And kind of depending on how much important is the first one that I'll kind of start off as well. But the first one, I'll just read it out loud for everyone, is: do you believe our org's ability to execute our mission is impacted by the composition of our board with regard to diversity? That's number 1. Number 2 is: how are we willing to change to advance diversity on our board? And then number 3 is: how has our organization been complicit in perpetuating systemic oppression, and are we going to change moving forward? So these are 3. Yeah.
I'm going to say something. I see some people on the Google Doc. The white slide just repeats the questions, and then each one of them, the red slide is question 1, the green slide is question 2, and the purple slide is question 3. We just want you to put an X. So we're kind of using this as a annotations or a whiteboard, but we had too many people to do it internally, so we thought we'd try it this way. So go to the color slide and just put an X in there. You have to click, and then you can enter data.
And so I have a lot for question 1, and question 1 is usually a great kind of first crucial conversation start. And Jeanne gave me this tip a few years ago that I love. And maybe it's not, you pose a yes or no question, but instead of saying yes or no, you use kind of like a fist to 5 type of scenario. So for those who can see me on video, you pose this question for your group, and you ask everyone in your board to hold up your hand and rate from fist to 5 of what works for your organization. So like kind of rank. So like for this question, you know, I'd put fist, we don't have to change. We're not impacted. We're doing great. 5, we have to rehaul everything and completely do everything over as well. And kind of go around the room and ask people why they voted as well. Like ask the 3s, ask the 4s, ask the 1s. Like kind of think about that too, just to get the conversation started, to think about, you know, what kind of is needed. Because this will give you a good sense if who's on your board is ready for certain things and kind of moving forward as well, and kind of gives you a great assessment to think about what folks are kind of navigating as well. You know, the second question is also thinking about moving forward. Is like, okay, we've acknowledged diversity is important. We acknowledge we need to change. How are we actually going to move forward and do things differently? And what are people comfortable with kind of navigating? That's always an important thing too, to kind of assess comfort level with everything as well, because you want to do that before you recruit some folks on your board, because you want to avoid their hardships that they may face. And then 3 is kind of the important question that many organizations are having too as well, but you kind of have to work up to it, is like, how are we being complicit? How are we ignoring some of the things that we have been doing? And what are we going to do to change and move forward and rectify that as well? So great kind of sample questions to get these crucial conversations going, and using the principles to kind of share how your organization can have those important discussions to assess where you are with regard to advancing diversity. So thank you everyone for sharing. And we have a couple other Google Docs coming up, so we'll try this out again. But thanks for working with us.
Now you do your best. So what we would like to do now is we gave you 3 ideas. We talked about the different ways you get assess board readiness, a couple of ideas there. We talked a couple of ideas around defining diversity, and we talked about a couple of ideas around crucial conversations. So this is just in the area talking about readiness. So we want you to think about what idea is sticking out for you. Jonathan Moore, are you getting the breakout groups ready? We want 2 or 3 in a group, and we're going to
ready to go. Yep.
Excellent. And we're going to put them in. We're going to put them in for 4 minutes. And we just want you to chat what's sticking out in your brain. And maybe you have an idea you want to share with your group. So if we're ready to go, let's put people in groups. A couple of you have cameras on, so I'm going to call on Heather, Achia, and Charmaine to just share what was a comment that came in your panel just then. So Heather, if you have one, and if you can't think of anything, you could call on a friend, and then we'll call on Charmaine. Blue Singletary.
So I have to be honest, we were kind of not talking about what we're supposed to be talking about. We actually started talking about an idea that Wake County is all their outreach coordinators are meeting together once a month and sharing ideas. This is what we've been doing through COVID about outreach and what different things that we're trying. And then other counties are trying to replicate that. So I am very sorry we did not talk about the topic. We definitely need more diversity on our board. I'm from Johnson County, but I apologize. And so
no apologies. We go with the flow here. Okay. How about Charmaine? How about your group? Give us a short tweet of what y'all talked about.
Okay, so for my county, actually, we talked about how it was still the traditional Smart Start structure of the board, and so we have everybody from directors from all these different other organizations that actually seem as though maybe it's a possible conflict of interest to help us when they've got their own organizations, to worry about. And I can't remember, I think it was Ashley who, I don't see her on here, who had the opposite. She said they really didn't interact with their board that much directly. It was just the executive director would pose questions about their staff, and then they would get feedback. But for us, our board is not interacting. They show up, but I guess basically they don't show out. They don't provide the support that we need.
And hopefully some of the initial ideas about how to have some conversations will help you get positioned so that you can look at diversity on your board as the next step instead of the first step. So thank you for sharing. All right, let's go back here to recruitment.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeanne. So next session we have is recruitment. So how can boards integrate good recruitment practices and apply an EDI lens? So this is now you've had your conversations. Now we're ready to go out and recruit some individuals and build on that. So the first tip we have up is determine your value proposition. So I use this in thinking about too, is when you're engaging new people, the first question that many people are thinking about, well, why should I join your board? I know all of you, I'm sure, are great organizations. You have great missions. You do a lot of things too as well. And you should be bragging about it. It should be an exciting moment to join your board and be on that as well. And I know we've done some trainings for some emerging leaders and kind of thinking about board is this is an exciting opportunity for many of us to not just expand our skill set and expand our networks, but to advance in our community and be mission driven, kind of focus on that. So this is an exciting opportunity. So we got to think about how we can determine why you should join your board and kind of be prepared for that as well. So the next slide, we're going to try another Google Doc thing as well, but these are 5 questions. And these are 5 questions that I've given to prospective board members on what they should ask for the board. So these are kind of 5 areas that you can think about as a board is maybe I should prepare those questions or prepare those comments so that when I'm engaging with new prospective board members, I'm ready with great answers and kind of solidified as well. So Jeanne's going to send another Google Doc. And what we just want you to do is we're going to touch on all of them, but talk about which is you're most curious about right now. Like which question would you kind of like to kind of discuss first, think about what makes the most sense. So we're going to add that to the Google Doc and we'll hopefully see if this works. And if you can access it, definitely feel free to hop in the chat as well. But this has just like 5 columns. So just put an X in one of the main 5 columns and kind of think about what your choice would be, what you're most curious about for your organization and what question you want to talk about.
And as Jonathan said, feel free to put it in the chat box. We don't want technology to get in the way. We're trying to play with technology and help it work for us. But if you can't get there, just put your numbers in the chat box. I see some people are able to get in there.
I see, yep, I see a lot of them. I love Google Docs because you see just all these anonymous animals coming in and it's a little zoo happening.
So Jonathan, it looks like right now, just to start with number 5 and number 2 are getting a lot of hits.
Alrighty, so I'll start with number 5 because as a professional fundraiser, I always navigate this question. So this is an important topic that I know I encourage many people to ask before joining the board is what are the giving and fundraising expectations for the board as well? And I think also too, you also have to be prepared as what is the influence of fundraising on your board? Some of us have very heavy fundraising boards, but some people, it might not be as much as well. You also might have to acknowledge with recruiting diversity that not everyone has the same access to resources, means, and networks to help with fundraising. So how are you thinking about what that looks like for the board as well? And also, do you need, does everyone on your board need to go out and ask their network for money as well? Do you need that expectation? What does that look like? What are your bylaws saying as well? Can you create a subcommittee that's more focused on fundraising and let other folks too? But that's a very common question. And I know for many folks, it's kind of the hot topic because we need money to move our mission. So, you know, I always like to say too, I always encourage people when they join boards to be the giving priority. So, you know, it doesn't matter the amount, but as long as, and all you're giving, we're a priority for your organization. That's a common language that I have as well. But those give and get policies, so like you have to give a minimum amount or get a certain amount in, can be intimidating for many people. So having those conversations and be prepared to ask those questions as well.
How about number 2?
All righty, number 2. This is great. And this is where you take your matrix and you're really kind of determining what skills and perspectives you're kind of as well. So you might be looking for to add finance people, and then you might be looking for adding, you know, Black and brown people as well. So that's kind of what you're adding to kind of having the conversation and being honest about it too. I'd rather have people be honest and transparent about why we're doing this and kind of be open to ensuring that you're kind of building on that and mention that as well. Like, you know, we have this gap in our board. We respect your perspective. We respect where you come from and your skills and expertise. And this is why we're looking for those board as well. What's important about this question is you're looking at the person's whole self. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but just don't, there's many facets of our identities and skill sets. So we want to make sure that our whole self is ready to bring on the board. We're not just focused on one element of that as well. So, don't just go for someone because they're part of a marginalized group. Go for someone because they're part of a marginalized group and they have a certain perspective, they have network, and the skills to build on that. Number 4 seems to be the next one. So I'll kind of go from that. And we talked about that before, is your board representative of the population served? So that's obviously an important topic because your goal is to serve the people in your community. And if your board doesn't have the perspective to connect with the people that you're having, how is that effectively accomplishing your mission and moving forward, and also adapting to community needs? So being honest and transparent, about that is great. You can certainly say like, we're mostly at it, we're looking forward to this is where we're going for as well. That builds trust and transparency in the process too, or acknowledging where you are doing great, but not so great as well. And ensuring that kind of question with that too. And then I see a few ties for kind of 3 and 2, 3 and 1. So I'll kind of go for number 1 first. So what is the structure of the board and how it makes the decision? So that's also important to think about, because sometimes you might recruit for diversity on your board, but they're not in positions that actually make any decisions. Or if your board is a board that meets in the meeting, but really has the meeting after with the few exec committee members to make the important decision too. So what does that structure look like to ensure that everyone has autonomy over their position and has the opportunity to engage effectively and make sure their voice is heard? And that's an important question to think about, because, I wouldn't want to just join a board to just join the board and just be on it. I want to know that, I have the opportunity to influence decisions and build on that and make my voice work. And then the last question I'll just briefly go over is how the board handle conflict and crisis. I think this past year proved that crisis is inevitable and we have to kind of navigate things. And how does the board kind of make sure that we're navigating conflict and having those conversations, and how are they prepared to kind of make those decisions too? So like, are we having the important conversations at board meeting? Are we setting certain times aside from that as well? Are we kind of building on where we can go for? So think about those questions too, because I know any type of situation right now there's a lot of crisis happening in the past year, and it's proven. And I want to ensure that a board member or a board is kind of knowing how they're prepared to kind of navigate it as well. So.
Great. Next one is number 5, building relationships. The idea is, as a board, if you're interested in diversity, you got to start building relationships in January for recruiting in December. You can't start in November and rush out and grab people. Those of you who've been successful know this. So the idea about building relationships is start before you need somebody, start before the need is there, build those relationships. And I would say to people, we're always looking for people on our board. Here's what we're looking for. And you're planting seeds so that you're not hiding from people. It's not a desperation ploy. It's more of an invitation as you're out in the community and you meet interesting people and you say, we're always looking, we recruit at this time of the year, but we like to build relationships. If you want to have a conversation. And so you're asking it more from a relationship and an opportunity. Like you're clear what your value proposition is. You know what difference people make on your board. You know what difference your board makes in the community. And you come from that place where you're starting to build relationships. So you're beginning what we call kind of a deep networking, where you are planting seeds. So you might not recruit that person. You say, even if this year is not the right year, keep us in mind. Next year might be the best year. We're going to switch back and talk to you in another year if you don't mind. So it's not always right now, got to have you. And somebody's in a bad place this year, too crazy, life's too busy, but they might be interested in a year or two. What I've learned from Jonathan as well is there are a lot of people who are at the younger end of our profession who are 28, 30, and they see board work as a chance to develop their professional network. And I don't think that's a bad thing. If they can come and add to you with their enthusiasm and their expertise, they should be able to take out the fact that they're building, when you're new in a job, you only know the people in that job. If you can be on a board, you start meeting people on that board. So Don't underestimate the ability of a young person to join your board, and then you become their first board, and they always feel kindly towards you because you're the one that taught them how to be on a board. One of the ideas I like to share around building relationships comes from an article I read a while ago, and they called it a blue ribbon nominating committee. But the idea behind this is think of some of the leaders in your community who would be those influencers Jonathan mentioned. So you're not going to ask them to be on your board, but you're going to bring 2 or 3 or 4 of them together. And, in face-to-face, it could be for a breakfast meeting that's an hour. On Zoom, you could be creative in how you do this, but it's still kind of a meeting of the minds and say, can you give us an hour? We just want to share with you some of what we're doing in the community, some of what our board's doing, and we want to ask you to help recommend some people you think we need to reach out to. So if you have people who are in the small business community show up, somebody from the Chamber of Commerce, you have somebody from a faith community show up, you have somebody from the school, PTA, whatever kind of community, and they're there as a leader, and you're saying to them, this is what our mission is about. You have a board member says, I'm on the board, and this is what it means to me to be on this board. And you have another board member that says a little bit more about your board, and you're just having a conversation, but you're inviting these people, and you're saying, we're going to share with you who we are, because we're looking to open doors. Are there people you would suggest that might be interested in being on our board? Because what we'll do is we'll contact them. If you don't mind us using your name, and we'll say, Tristan recommended you, or Deidre recommended you. Do you mind so that kind of expands your network out a little bit. And maybe the people at the meeting say, I'm interested, but that's not the point. The point is more to have a conversation and use them as a way, if nothing else, they are now aware of your organization. You only spent an hour. You had a couple of board members with you kind of saying, you and the executive director and a couple of board members are reaching out. So now you have a connection with that person, and you say, well, if you don't have any names, can we reach back out to you in 6 months or a year and have a conversation? Can we keep you in our loop? Just let you know what's going on. So it's about kind of very intentional networking. When I'm reading all the reports out there, what they suggest, one idea when you're changing diversity on your board is to bring on 2 or 3 people at a time. Instead of having everybody is the same old, and you bring in one African-American or one of a different religious group or one of a different age group. So you could say to people, okay, this is where we are now as we're recruiting, where we've not had a lot of diversity on this board, but we're trying this year. So you will be the only African-American on the board, or you will be the only Jewish person on the board, or you will be the only person under 35, maybe even 40. We're trying to make a difference. And so we want you to come in. We're going to bring in a lot of different faces this year. And together we're hoping that we're going to make a difference. So that's something where you can just kind of bring on a couple of people at a time so that nobody feels like they're the only one. The other example I read about recently was interesting. And they said, if they put it in terms of an arts organization, and they said, if you were an arts center and you had on your board artists and patrons, so then you have one group that's rich and doesn't do art, and one group that's not so rich and does art, and there's kind of no in between. So they said, try to think of some in between, like somebody who does art and maybe also has some money, or somebody who doesn't do art but also is low income. So you're mixing it up and not just having the people at the low end be the providers or the artisans, and the people at the other end be the high end who aren't involved. So try to think, where's that middle that you can bring in people with different skill sets? This goes back, the last idea I want to share goes back to what Jonathan said in terms of if you have rules, say around fundraising, that might exclude some people, you need to rethink your rules. If your rules say you got to bring in this much money, maybe you need to rethink how we do fundraising so that you're not excluding people, because that will set up some of your current board members' mindsets and they won't see how you can do outreach. And then one other is ask your constituents for ideas, but you got to come at it from this is an opportunity, not we're desperate, and just say, this is the board. This is the difference we're trying to make. These are the actions we're trying to take this year. Do you have some suggestions as to who we should talk to? And you're asking your constituents to kind of pipe in and give you some ideas.
Awesome. And the last kind of tip that we had for this section is staying authentic. And I think, so, and I bring this up too, because we did as I mentioned, a lot of training with emerging leaders, and the most valuable experiences are where they're allowed to be their authentic self. And what I mentioned before as well. So being your authentic, you don't have to be a superhero, but bring your own superpower of being your full authentic self and ensuring that you can bring everything to the board. So you can be the young person and the LGBT person and the social media person too, like allowing all those hats on the board, because when you're not allowed to be your authentic self, it's exhausting, and then you have to recoup somewhere else, and you don't want that on the board, especially if they're working or doing other things too. Like this is an additional on top of most things. So ensuring that you're allowing for authenticity. So the next slide has some 6 type of things that we kind of just want to think about in terms of allowing for authenticity. So one is vulnerability. So mentioning to, being vulnerable and letting us be present and allowing us to be honest about our conversations and being sure that as well. So allowing for that vulnerability, because that vulnerability will allow us to have those important conversations and move forward as well. Ownership of your decisions or the activities that you're working on too, or ownership and feeling like you're part of the process is definitely another part too as well. Like I want to feel as a board member, a part of that group, a part of that decision making, and a part of it too as well. I just don't want to be, thought of as checking a checkbox too. The motivation to grow, and this can grow professionally, but just personally too. I think all of us should be motivated to grow as better people and kind of navigate how we can do that as well. So if you're encouraging spaces where everyone feels motivated to grow, you're more likely to ensure that authenticity is there and present for that kind of building as well. Empathy is another strong part too as well. And I know many of us being in the human service area, we understand empathy, and you have to be empathetic through many of the situations from navigating board service, because I've heard many frustrating situations about past employers and boards where they don't understand what it's like to come from an underrepresented group, or they put on extra unintentional microaggressions, or put up barriers or policies that they don't think about that creates, extra, troubling and frankly trauma too, that could experience what it's like to kind of navigate that group. So being the empathy to understand that person's perspective and ensuring you're minimizing any negative experience. I also have a social work hat. I'm also big strengths-based focus. Like, we should be focusing on embracing everyone's strengths and what they bring to the table as well, because it's kind of hard to being forced to kind of put outside your element and not be able to bring what you feel like you bring to the table as well, which is a common thing for example, fundraising. Everyone's like, go out and ask for money, but not everyone's going to be great at asking for money too. So think about ways to embrace all those strengths and allow for people to fully accept kind of as well. And that's thinking about the recruiting process too. When you're welcoming people and kind of navigating what it looks like, how can you be strengths focused too? And then last one is mentioned inclusion too. So really making sure that you're not just bringing on people, but you're intentionally trying to change the culture to be inclusive, and you're welcoming the perspectives or thinking differently of how you're doing things too as well. Ensuring your meetings are at times that work for everyone and not an inconvenience too. When you have special events or do different types of activities as a board member, they're included too. Being flexible with family dynamics. Right now, I can't imagine being a working parent right now, because you're doing your job, you're at home teaching your kids sometimes when they're virtual, and trying to just, kind of navigate things too. How is that like being on the board too as well? So ensuring that your practices are inclusive of all those people, especially if you want those people at the table, and bringing that as well. So just some tips and kind of things to think about too, just allow for that authenticity and allow people to be able to bring their full selves to the board experience so that they're more likely to engage, feel fulfilled, and help it move forward your organization.
We're going to do another breakout group. Stop at the end of this section. We talked about recruitment, from determining what's your value proposition, building relationships, some ideas around that, and staying authentic. So give you a chance in a group of 3, 4, 5. I'm not sure how they're going to play out. Jonathan Moore, are you ready?
I am ready. Just have everyone pay attention. You'll get a pop-up about the breakout rooms.
It's a chance for you to chat with each other.
Awesome. Alrighty, so we're going to dive into the next session, and we're just the next third and final part on our roadmap for today is just onboarding. So how can we onboard everyone, get them ready to be effective board members? So, and I think Jeanne's going to share our first tip. Oh, we're going to do a poll.
We're going to go to embrace board buddies.
That's right.
People hear board buddies, people use the idea of board buddies. I'm going to give you a very specific way to think about board buddies. I think of this as a very small piece that you give to a board member. So as soon as you vote on your 3 new board members, you say to people, who wants to call A, B, or C? So Heather calls Magda, and Linda calls Tristan, and Sharon calls Scotty. And basically you're calling them up quick before the first meeting call saying, hey, this is Jeanne. I'm on the board of ABC. We look forward to seeing you at the board meeting. We're so excited you joined. Got any questions? Got any, anything going on? Great. Now, if you have an in-person meeting, then I would say, I'm going to save you a seat at the meeting. I should put my phone up here, right? I'm going to save you a seat at the meeting. So you're talking to them on your phone. I'm going to save you a seat so you can come and sit next to me. And then I might even ask another board member to sit on the other side. So what you got in an in-person meeting is everybody you got 6 or 8 people engaged already because I got my board buddy next to me. I might be introducing them. The second thing is if you're doing it online, then my role is to introduce this person to the board. So at the next meeting, I, the veteran board member, am going to be called on to introduce Amy, our new board member. And so in that phone call, I'm going to say, how would you like me to introduce you? What you want me to say about you? Tell me about your family or your life or something so that I'm introducing her, which is engaging me as a board member. It's engaging her as a board member. And if you have 3 board members, that's 6 board members who feel engaged at that meeting. Plus, because I called her or him, I'm kind of feeling connected. So after the first meeting as a board buddy, I arrange with my person and I say, let me call you up in the next week. You got 10 minutes. And I call up and I just say, hey, just want to check in with you that what we did in our board meeting makes sense because I know every board's different. There was some jargon somebody used. Did you know what this word meant? Let me explain that. And did you notice that when they said this, everybody just raised their hand and got up and left? That's something we always do. Or whatever it is your board, what's weird about your board. What you're doing is you're making this new person feel welcome. Now, if you're doing that for everybody, you're doing it for everybody. And so that's why it relates to diversity. You're not just doing it specifically. You're being a welcoming board because you've already acknowledged that joining your board is kind of a challenge to join a new group. So back to board buddy. After the second meeting, I call you up again and I say, got any other concerns or questions? If you notice anything of interest, and then I say, okay, I'm done. You're on your own now. You got to fly, but I'll be around. So you're not asking them to get married for a year. You're not asking them to go out to dinner and, go on dates or anything. You're just saying, hey, initial phone call after the first meeting, phone call after the second meeting. You're making it sweet and simple. But what you got is you're helping develop some leadership on your board because if I raised my hand and said, okay, I'll call somebody, I'm doing something, right? I'm stepping up. So the idea of board buddies is think of it that way. You can read all sorts of ideas. I'm just trying to give you a simple idea. So you call, you introduce, and you follow up. That's kind of what I'm saying that it is. The next idea, which is number 8, goes a little bit beyond what I just said, involving current board members. We're talking about onboarding now. And I'm saying, how can you get your current board members engaged in the onboarding? Because what you're trying to do is bring these new people into your board team, group dynamic. So it can't be done just by the president or chair or executive director. Everybody ought to have a little role. And Zoom actually makes it easier because if you could divide your content up, I could come in at 1:10 to 1:15 and give 5 minutes of, let me talk to you about this part of I'm going to talk to you about being on committees. And I could spend 6 minutes talking about committees. And then I hand it off to another board member who comes in at 1:25 and talks to 1:30. So you could give a lot of board members a 5 or 10 minute piece. And everybody on your board could talk 5 or 10 minutes about something. Again, why does this relate to diversity? Because you're being intentional and welcoming people into the board. We talked about recruiting. We talked about assessing. Now you've brought people on your board, but you're not just going to welcome the people who we call diverse or different. You're welcoming everybody because you're a welcoming board and you're doing it in an intentional way. So you're including all your current board members to some level to welcome and onboard your new members. Some questions. Okay, here's one thing you could do. You could ask your current board members, to create a list of questions for newcomers and then answer them. And so that's a sheet you could give out. And so people can contribute through that. It could be questions like, who sits where? Is it acceptable to vote against committee recommendations? And have your board, that's an interesting question that I'd want to know on your board. Is it, how formal or informal is the decision making? Do we follow Robert's Rules of Order? Can you not talk out of line? Or are we a more informal board and we do it another way? I would want to know that before I come into the board because I don't want to be awkward. So that would be what I'm calling that is a list of questions for newcomers. Additionally, what I've talked about here is small parts, many voices. Break it down. Give people 5 and 10 minutes of content. And the content can be 3 areas from information about the organization, information about the board itself, and then maybe information about the whole kind of the program aspect. So the organization might be the back side of the organization, and program is more the front side, and then the board itself. Your board members all can tell 5 minutes about one of those pieces. So what you do is you generate a list of topics and ask people, which one of these would you feel most likely to come and add 5 or 10 minutes? Now, it's really easy on Zoom because they can just pop in for a few minutes. If you go back to doing an onboarding online, it could be you do part of it on Zoom and part of it in person. And some of it is that way you can involve more people. What I've heard from more boards than I can believe is they really like online meetings because they get higher attendance. So now we got to increase our skill of using online. And then one big question I always like to share, if you don't know what to do in an onboarding, is ask your current board members, what do you wish you had known when you joined the board? And that is your content. If you have this beautiful content that's this whole notebook that you go through and nobody mentions those questions, well, your board's telling you what they wish they knew. All right, Jonathan.
All righty. And our last kind of strategy is to create a checklist. So create that onboarding checklist so that folks have a kind of an understanding of what the expectation is on onboarding as well. And we're going to go to the next slide. So my board, we created an onboarding checklist. We took an example from Board Source and kind of just adapted it to what works for us as well. But what we love about the checklist is, one, it outlines everything that people will feel kind of needed to kind of help jump on the board and kind of navigate what information it as well. It also outlines who's responsible for certain things as well. So you'll kind of see here in some of our checkboards, it might be a little small, but like, we're a founding organization, so you should meet with the founder to go over some things, or you should meet with the governance chair to go over expectations and everything like that too as well. So it gets that involvement from different people and kind of outlines that as well. And then here too as well, you see, finances and fundraising, but another thing too is you see asterisks is, we have the capacity to have a separate onboarding like presentation separate from a board meeting. So we'll have that sometimes there, and we'll indicate what can be done in that onboarding session. And especially if you can't make it, because we all have to be flexible, but it kind of gives them a sense of who to connect with and who to reach out. But this is self-directed. It can be online. Your board buddy checks in and sees how they can help to navigate moving forward as well. But it kind of gives them an outline and prepared kind of plan so they can feel ready to jump on board and ready to navigate that as well.
So what we just covered was the idea of onboarding. And in onboarding, we talked about embracing board buddies, gave you a couple of ideas around board buddies. We talked about involving your current board members and gave you a couple of ideas around engaging your current board members. And we gave you a sample of a checklist. All of these, you can say, these are good practices regardless, but they're more useful to you if you're intentionally trying to be diverse because you're creating from the beginning a community that somebody wants to be part of and they feel like they're part of. And you're saying to everybody, you're welcome here. You're not just picking out, oh, you need more training because you've never been on a board, or, oh, you come from somewhere else, a different sector. You're just saying to everybody, here's what we need. And the checklist from Jonathan kind of allows for personal practice as you move through. Some will move through it quicker than others. So we're going to put you on breakout groups again. Yes, you get all the slides. I think they were submitted. Maybe they weren't posted yet. We put them up as a PDF. We're putting you in groups again. And we can say, talk about the onboarding, but if you want to talk about the whole session, that's fine too. And we're putting you in groups of 4 and hoping you're going to end up with at least one other person. But just share what's one idea you're taking away, what's sticking out for you. What we're trying to do is build in you talking to each other as much as just us talking. So that's why we're doing all these breakout groups. Hope you are enjoying that. Are you ready, Jonathan?
And they're open.
I think we have everybody back here. People are still popping in. It's hard to see. Everybody's back. Looks like people are back. So I just want to sum this up by saying a lot of what these ideas come down to is being intentional and trying things and being authentic and not feeling like you have to be an expert, but own your beginning level or own your areas that you don't know, and being authentic, being intentional, and having a plan, and start where your beginning is, which we were suggesting has to do with having some readiness. Too often what I hear from boards is how they want to jump into recruiting before they've looked to see who are we that we're welcoming people or not? How do we bring people on? So what I would like to try one more time with you, now we're trying to model using different technologies. So I've done this with different size groups, and people love the breakout groups. I've actually done board retreats where people say it's the best retreat they've ever been to. You know why? Because they got in groups and talked to each other, and they're used to just coming in and sitting at tables. So technology can do some great stuff. So this next piece I want to do is another Google Doc. It's a little bit different, and it could be sloppy, but that's okay. It's about practicing. So this Google Doc is what we're going to do. Let me see. We want to know what's going to be your first action. Because, part of learning something is taking action. It could be a conversation, could be anything that you think you need to do first. I'm going to share the link in just a minute. And basically, I have multiple pages of this doc. And according to your first name, first letter. So Heather goes to the one where it has an H, and Magda will go where there's an M, and it has broken out by the alphabet. And just find a place and type your name in, and then next to it, start typing your action. So you're claiming a line when you put your name in there. Now, I've done this with a smaller group, and you can do this with your board. It's a great way after you have a discussion. You share a Google Doc, and I pre-populate their names if it's a small group and I know who will be there. And you have everybody write down your concern or your question or your thoughts. And it's a great way to have a discussion that allows for the thinkers as well as the talkers to contribute, because sometimes the talkers get in the way of the thinkers. So that's another diversity we have to think about. How do you get both in there? So I'm going to share with you this Google Doc link. And like I said, kind of go to the page that looks like it's your first name and claim a line. And the last page is, if you can't find anywhere to go, just go to the last page if you can get there. Now, if you can't even get in there, just type it in the chat box. So we're being very flexible, and that's what you are. So here we go. Here's the link. Click on there. You're answering what's your first action. And you get to see what everybody else is typing. That's what's cool about this. So it's like a conversation, but it's a quiet conversation. So A to E is red, and F to J is blue. Oh, yeah, look at y'all. You're doing great. K to O, P to T is kind of orange, and U to Z is purple at the end. So, or just change your name and find a page that works and put a false name in there. Learn more about each board member's interest. That's a great way, just kind of when you're bringing people in or when you already have people on the board. What is it? Maybe I want to be on the finance committee, but I don't have a CPA background. Maybe I want to learn that. So if you ask me, let's see, how are we doing here? Actually, I'm having a hard time scanning this document. How are you doing, Jonathan?
Scanning well. I see board buddies a lot, developing relationships as a priority, breakout rooms and meetings, asking good questions, onboarding plans, a lot of board buddies. I love the board buddy system.
Well, and the thing with board buddies is you make it work for your organization. I just gave you one idea. Develop it in a way that works for you, but it's about the board buddy then owns the relationship in a way that they don't if they're just sitting there as one of 6 or 8 or 10. So Katrina said matrix and board buddies. Magda said, I'm in the midst of planning orientation for 4 new board members, so I will review closely our onboarding plans. Excellent. Good chance to make one little step different, Magda, even if you can't change everything. And for some reason, I'm just not able to get up and down this document. It's just stuck on me. Let's see. Chandler says, having a readiness conversation with my staff team. Yeah, getting intentional about board recruitment. And Charmaine says, pose questions for them to present ideas instead of always our presenting. Excellent. I found it works really well if instead of asking for an answer, when you're having it, you say to everybody, write down individually, have them all write down, whether it's Zoom or write down what question you think the board should ask about this. And then gather all the questions and then have them pick which is the most important question for us to discuss together as a group. So, Jonathan, I want to thank you for being part of this presentation. The Google Doc will be yours. All those Google Docs, once you've accessed them, you can access them again to look at them, even though sometimes it's a bit crunchy to get that many people on it. I hope you maybe got some different ideas of how you could use a Google Doc in your board meetings and be more intentional with thinking about how you're recruiting diversity. Start before you start. Don't just start with recruiting. Start before you start. Any final words you want to add in there, Jonathan?
No, I just want to thank everyone for it. I saw a lot of great takeaways. I know Jeanne and I are always open to connect to share more ideas and stuff like that too. So, but I want to reiterate your point, like we all don't have to be the experts in all this, but if you're authentic and trying, that comes across a lot more to kind of see how we're growing as well. So thank you, everyone.